Hi, I'm Michelle Segrest, and this is the Factory of the Future podcast.
This podcast is inspired by my 3-volume book series on the evolution of modern manufacturing. Each episode features engaging conversations with game-changing experts discussing the processes and innovations that are changing the landscape of modern manufacturing. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and leave me a 5-star rating on iTunes, and take just a couple of seconds to leave a review. And then go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss a single episode. To be successful today, manufacturing firms must think like software companies, meaning they learn to take advantage of emerging digital technologies and data to elevate their operations and client experience. This mindset shift can result in practical innovation and growth. Bob Armbrister serves as the president and CEO of Spark BusinessWorks. He leans on his 15 years of executive experience to implement the Spark Way, an approach of practical innovation that helps business leaders build tech that gets adopted and delivers ROI quickly. Bob was recently selected as a 40 under 40 leader by the Grand Rapids Business Journal, and it's my pleasure to have him on the Factory of the Future podcast. So, welcome to the podcast, Bob.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Michelle. I appreciate being
Of
here
course,
today.
it's my pleasure. We have a lot of great, fun things to talk about and important topics that are important to my audience, and so I want to get right to it. But first, just give us a little introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background as it relates to manufacturing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I've been in software and really helping businesses leverage technology, and primarily, small, medium sized, privately held companies. I feel like I'm just passionate about helping those firms. They're I think they're
Mhm.
underserved when it comes to some technology needs, and taking a practical approach. And seeing the benefits is something that gets me real excited. In the Midwest here, from Michigan, 4 young boys, and juggling a fast-growing software company, and helping manufacturing firms as well innovate and
Okay,
grow.
that's really cool. I want to jump right into this idea of why manufacturers should be thinking like software companies. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it, several times in just the last few years. Some of the firms that we're helping is some really cool stuff. I mean, um, but just the challenges that a lot of manufacturing firms that we see that we're helping with, are unique. They're not, you know, the way they do it makes them different, right? And that really is what separates a lot of these firms. And a lot of times, there's not easy to use software off the shelf that you can buy and implement. And most of them already have, a core system or two that run their business, and it's all kind of the ancillary stuff that really makes their company unique. Is the stuff that we end up jumping in and helping them with. And then also the demands from the client. A lot of the technologies that we're used to as consumers every day. Look at what changed in the last 5 or 10 years has been tremendous, right? Every you can track your pizza going through Domino's and what stage it is in. And then consumers are bringing those demands to a lot of these privately held smaller companies, and it's not easy to find the resources needed to kind of give that same experience, because the client, I mean, they're demanding it. And so, thinking like a software company is what we see a lot of these manufacturing firms. They're having to figure out e-commerce. They're having to figure out real-time order tracking. They're having to figure out all these things. And so, yeah, we're kind of asking people to start thinking like software companies, because every company now has some software running it.
Right.
So
Now, are the manufacturers that you're working with, are they developing their own software? Are they thinking like that kind of software company, or are they depending on other software programs that are out there that may be applicable to their business?
Yeah, so they're doing both, and I think that's that's the challenge that a lot of them have, where they need they need a highly technical subject matter expert to help them through these decisions. So we always really try to recommend, like, who do you have that can help you make these
Mhm.
decisions? Because a lot of times it's, I have this older ERP or MRP system, I don't want to change it,
Right.
but I have all these new demands. How do I, figure this out? And a lot of times it's, maybe it's, stitching a couple different tools together. Sometimes it's leveraging what they have and shifting it around. So there's no one easy answer. We've seen firms do all of the above, and I think it's it really depends on the
Do you
situation.
find that some of these manufacturers, once they learn a software system or, like, for example, a CMMS system or something like that, are they really monogamous to that system? Because it takes a while to learn. The learning curve is steep. So is it difficult for them to now switch? I mean, software changes so rapidly, as you, of course, know, that sometimes it's hard to keep up. And I think that's something that scares, especially some of the small to medium sized companies.
Yeah, I mean, it should scare people. That's a big deal, right? And we try to really make sure. I mean, there's probably, for every 10 clients, I would say 8 or 9 of them can live with what they
Mm-hmm.
have and not replace it. So that, it's a lot of times what we've seen is, if a system's been used for a long period of time, maybe stakeholders have changed, maybe the system has probably had upgrades, and really working with that vendor to say, hey, let's reassess, what are we doing right, what are we doing
Mm-hmm.
wrong, training the individual. So there's a lot to go in before you throw the baby out with the
Yeah, right.
bathwater. Um, so really understanding the business and where it's going in the next several years, and thinking about those problems and not just maybe the challenges you're having today, and then kind of reassessing technology as a whole, and then really trying not to replace some of those big core systems unless they're truly the reason that you're getting held back from your goals, is kind of how we pitch it. Is that really preventing you from your growth or your goals? In some cases
Mm-hmm.
it is. Hopefully in those cases, the system can be changed or updated. um, and then rarely, but it does happen, where it's like, yeah, that system will not do what you're trying to do. And in that case, yeah, you do have to
Yeah.
change.
I mean, it's change is hard, I think, sometimes, especially for the older generation that's just so used to doing things a certain way. So that's just embracing the change may be the first step, and it's a difficult one. I'm wondering if you could give us some more examples. So, what is the manufacturing equivalent of tracking the pizza delivery guy with the pizza? How can we apply that to manufacturing?
Yeah, so really we call that kind of field data collection. And we do a lot in construction, and we do a lot in manufacturing, and getting data in real time is what we've seen a lot of manufacturing firms be able to then use that, sync it with the existing data systems, to then be able to produce that information, and then deliver it to wherever you want. And a lot of times firms will start internally. I want to track progress internally better, um, and more efficiently, and then eventually kind of bringing out to the end user. But getting that data in real time, whether it's on a next to a machine, whether it's in certain um, parts of the process, and then tracking things there, and then getting that data. And so now, I mean, the technology is as least expensive as it's ever been. It's the easiest to use as it's ever been. And then the users in on the shop floor are the most technically savvy than they've ever been. So it's a great time to kind of reassess and say, okay, maybe we tried something 5 years ago, and it failed miserably, but now the cost to implement something on the shop floor, and then also designing it, like, if we go back to thinking like a software company, what software companies do is they use this thing called user-centered design, right? Design thinking. So they put the user's needs first. So instead of thinking of the solution, like, we need a new MRP system, they go and talk to the users and say, hey, we're trying to collect this data. What do you need in the field?
Right.
And starting at that end user standpoint is what's going to increase your adoption rate, because you're getting their needs accounted for. So taking that approach to collecting data in real time with those individuals is the key to success. And then kind of coming up with the solution last, versus what's typically done is someone attends a conference or they attend a sales pitch or two, and then they come and say, hey, we got to implement this new system, and they just kind of shove it at the company. And we see that failing a lot, versus starting with the users, figuring out their needs, and then figuring out the solution. So that's how software companies think, and that's what we're trying to help our clients.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It kind of feels like a reverse engineering strategy where you're starting with the solution first, like what is the solution that you want, and then you come up with how to get there, and you kind of back out of it. So I think that's something that a lot of people in manufacturing are used to, that approach. So it makes sense to go to manufacturers with that strategy. I think that's something that probably resonates with them. Do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, it really being able to think ahead and really kind of plan for tomorrow's challenges and then work your way back, I think is what's really worked well. And then, exploring all the different possibilities and thinking outside the box, and then trying. I mean, I think the biggest thing is kind of trying things on a smaller scale. That's something that software companies do too, right? They make iterations. Like when Facebook, rolls out new changes, they can change something on the app for a certain group of people in a certain region, and then they get data on it. How did it work? And then they can roll it out to a larger group. And so what we've seen be very successful is when a company will say, okay, we're going to try it for this one production run, or we're going to try it in this one building, or we're going to try it on this one team. And then they get feedback and they iterate and they get better, and then they start to expand it out, versus, okay, December 31st, we're going to cut over and we're going to start this whole new
I think
system.
that's what scares people the most, is that idea that you have to
risky.
just take that very abrupt shift in your thinking and the way of doing things. So that's really hard and uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of people. So I like this idea of slowly rolling out mini solutions, so to speak, and and letting people have this aha moment. Oh, wow, this just made my job easier. So maybe I can embrace this idea. And I think this happens a lot in manufacturing when some sort of new crazy futuristic idea is presented, particularly to the older generation that have been there for 4 decades or something, and they're just used to doing things a certain way. So that's nice to see. It sounds to me like it's mostly custom products out there, custom software solutions. So you're having to customize the solutions to the specific industry or what they're producing and the type of manufacturing. Is that true, or am I reading that wrong?
In a lot of cases, there's customizations. There are a lot of tools and systems that are more off the shelf that you can acquire, maybe tailor it to your fit, to your company and launch. We see a lot of success in both cases. It's typically the more unique your business model is, or the more unique your business is, the more custom you typically have to go. The more cookie cutter type companies, the more off the shelf options that are there for you. So it really depends on the company.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now, I want to get the lingo right, because if I'm trying to think like a software company and I'm used to thinking like a manufacturer, I mean, there is a difference. So when you talk about digital transformation, are you talking about instrumentation, automation tools, remote monitoring? Are we kind of talking about the same thing, or is there a difference?
Yeah, so it really depends. I mean, digital transformation a lot of times is going to be around taking some of those more paper processes, or the more the manual type processes, and then streamlining those. So in some cases it could be tracking, if you're tracking waste on a piece of paper, and then someone's entering that into Excel, and then someone's taking that somewhere else. And so you could look at that whole process and look at digital transformation as we're going to just digitize it, or we're going to try to streamline and actually reduce the time that it takes to do that and the steps. So it really depends. Depends on what we typically see is a lot of times it's around getting more of that data in real time, and then having less touches to it.
Okay, that makes sense. When we talked before, when we just met and we were talking and thinking about why this would be a good topic for the podcast, you talked a little bit about some of the reasons why manufacturing is kind of behind when it comes to digital tools. And, let's talk about that a little bit. Why is manufacturing behind, and what can these manufacturers do to fix that?
Yeah, so we see there being several reasons. Sometimes it's generational
Hmm.
changes, where what worked to get them to a certain point did great, and a lot of firms are doing things to the most efficient as it could get with the current tool set. And so, I think we honor that. We think that's great. And then what we typically see is, okay, well, now to get to that next level, you now have to really look at something else. And a lot of times in firms across industries that can be seen as laggards, even though they're
Hmm.
not, they can change has happened through kind of a revolutionary standpoint. So when they moved to this latest system, and maybe it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was a revolution, right? It was like some massive thing happened, and it was like, we have to
Right.
go. And that's painful, right? And that experience, most of the times, it didn't go well. You probably had, I mean, just the chaos that happens in those. There's real
Sure.
pain there, and if the people that experience that pain are still in leadership positions, they're probably not going to want to do that again, right?
Sure.
Until it's a necessity again, until they have to. So we've seen that being. It's not that they don't want to change; it's that they know the pain and how much that really
Right.
costs, and they're kind of hesitant on it. Client demands are another reason that'll pull along. So I think as industries are changing, we're seeing other manufacturers now being required, whether it's through regulations or whether it's through client demands. Those requirements are starting to change faster than they'd used to be. So yeah, so there's a lot of reasons why things hadn't changed, and there's a lot of reasons why we're starting to see a big uptick in firms that have to
Yeah,
have
I
to
can see
adopt
that.
have
Yeah,
to
no, I
adapt.
see that. I see what you're saying. So if manufacturing is behind in this digital transformation world, what are some industries out there, just so we can compare, that are really ahead of the game? What are the industries that are thriving and surviving and leading the pack in digital transformation?
Yeah, the one that we've seen a lot in is in
Hmm.
construction. Uh, Again, an industry that typically is on the bottom rung when it comes to technology adoption. Their lack of labor,
Yeah.
um, lack of the workforce, the increased demands, and then some of the things that they've had to do recently when it comes to compliance and regulation and the speed of building. So they've been tasked with a very heavy lift, and that's another industry that has a lot of smaller, spread out
Hmm.
firms, right? Trade
Right.
contractors, I mean, are typically smaller firms. They're privately held. They don't have the resources that big firms have when it comes to technology. So, very similar type
Hmm.
industry, very similar demands. And what we've seen is a huge uptick in mobile devices and real time data from the field.
Right.
And so, if you look at construction, they have one of the most inefficient industries that has not improved over time. They're now seeing a huge uptick for all sorts of reasons, right? Industry demands, just like manufacturing. The access now to technology in the field and the users that are using it, I think, are probably, now that they have a much younger workforce, and even some of the older generations are much more comfortable using the technology in the field. So you've got this perfect storm. I think a lot of those are very similar to manufacturing. The type of businesses, the diversification, the changing in ownership now with aging entrepreneurs handing it over
Mm-hmm.
or selling. And so you've got all these very similar changes to these industries at a time where technology is now the least expensive and easiest to ever implement.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think those are some key phrases you just used. Inexpensive and easy to implement. This is very important features. I know when you're talking about implementing new devices and new technology into manufacturing, those are important factors. Talk a little bit more, if you can, Bob, about how small to medium sized manufacturers can really benefit from this digital transformation, because those are two key elements for them: easy to implement and inexpensive.
yeah, I mean, so it's kind of the silver lining. So you see larger firms that we help larger firms, and they'll come and say, hey, we've have this system and it's 30 years old and we need
Sure.
help. And then it's like, okay, we can come help. And then it's like, oh, hold on, I have to get 3 layers of approval, and then I
Right.
have to go through IT, and it's like this huge
Sure.
bureaucracy. And so they don't change because it's not worth
Yeah.
it. Whereas these smaller firms, I mean, and they're not, no, none of these firms are
Hmm.
small, right? I mean, every business is big and complex, but they don't have to have, most of our firms that we work with that are quote unquote smaller, they don't have that bureaucracy. They have the flexibility. This gives them a huge
Hmm.
advantage. And a lot of times they don't realize the advantage they have over maybe their competitors by being flexible, being nimble,
Right.
and the ability to change and try things is key. And um, accessing the resource internally as well. I mean, you have now a new generation of tech savvy individuals that can bring all sorts of great ideas. We have a few clients that have idea boards where they're having their line employees bringing up technical ideas on ways to make things
Sure.
better. I think it's
Yeah.
awesome, right? So I think the smaller firms, that they have an advantage over being able to adapt quickly, access that talent that larger firms are just too rigid to look into. I think that's a huge advantage. We see a lot of them taking advantage of it.
Do they tend to start small, like maybe look at one solution that they're interested in and then reverse engineer that into creating something to help them make their lives easier and then growing from there? Or are you seeing even the smaller or medium sized companies really starting big and just embracing it full force, this digital transformation that we're talking about?
Yeah, Michelle, it's a great question. So we've seen both. The one that's the most successful is the
Hmm.
starting small, and it's really about changing, building momentum, and then changing the culture into more of an innovative culture. And the way you do that is through getting momentum, through taking input and actually listening to it and making
Right.
changes. Um, and we see a lot of firms create, kind of guiding principles to innovation. So they might say something like, we're not going to implement anything that doesn't, help our line
Right.
workers, or we're not going to implement any changes that doesn't, impact the value to the customer. And then they might, some of them also have kind of ROI things. So they'll say, hey, we're not going to do anything that doesn't get a 12-month ROI. So they start to kind of gain
Hmm.
these principles around decision making when it comes to what are we going to do, what are we not going to do, and then start to solicit input and start to figure things out. And then using those principles, start trying things, and then gaining that momentum. And when someone sees their idea actually received by
Yeah.
management and maybe implemented, and that builds like some really cool innovative culture, and you start to get that momentum going, and then you add up all the small
Hmm.
wins. Before you know it, you've really created
Yeah,
something
it,
cool.
it does take a snowball effect. I've seen this many times where someone goes in and says, I don't want to work on a computer. I just want to work with my hands. I want to fix this manually. But then they see how it does make their lives easier. And so then they tell their friend, the guy next to him on the line, this really helped me. So you should try it too. And it
Right.
does have a snowball effect. I've seen this many, many times on the manufacturing floor. And it kind of takes that one naysayer
maybe the guy that
Right.
was really against it in the beginning to say, aha, that aha moment, aha, this is a good thing. We should try
Right.
this. Now what else can we do? What else can we do? Let's think of our
Right.
other pain points. What keeps us up at night? And how can we sleep better at night with some sort of great solution?
Right.
And then again, I think from what I'm hearing from you, that reverse engineering starts all over again with the next idea.
Yeah, a whole nother one, and those difficult users are typically avoided in historically when it came to change, because it was like, oh, we don't want to ask Jim. Jim's going to be super negative. We take the different approach. We say, bring Jim in. Bring, the guy that, or
Yeah,
lady, whoever, they walk by a computer screen and the thing gets all fuzzy, like anything they touch
exactly.
doesn't work. Bring, bring those
That's like
people
me. I walk
in
by
at
a
the
balloon
beginning.
and they all start popping for some reason. My static
Right.
electricity pops on
Yeah.
the balloons. Yeah, no, I get what you're
Right.
saying.
Yeah. We always suggest bringing them
Yeah,
in, and then the teams will always say, oh well, no, we don't want to do that, they're going to poke all these holes in the, so no, we
yeah,
want to know all the reasons
yeah.
why this isn't going to
Right.
work. And when you bring those individuals in early, make them part of the solution. When you go to roll something out, they're out there as a
That's right.
champion,
Right.
because it's their idea, it's part of their team. And
And they
so
take great pride in
so
that.
that's another
Yeah, they take
counter.
great pride in being
Yeah.
that champion. I love the term champion. That's such a great way to describe it.
Yeah.
And then they bring other people on board. I mean, and
Definitely.
it really does
Yeah.
change the culture, as you said, of an entire manufacturing floor. It's really
Yep.
powerful when that happens. So we're talking
Yeah.
a lot about reverse engineering, and there's some questions I have for you, but I want to reverse engineer my question a little bit. So,
Okay.
so I had some questions that
Yeah.
related directly to some manufacturing trends and issues that I see in the industry right now that I wanted to ask you about. But instead, I want to start by
Yeah.
asking you, what do you think are the current trends or pain points out there for manufacturers that you're seeing? And then let's talk about some of the solutions that might be out there. So what first of all, what are
Yeah.
some challenges right now in the manufacturing industry?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing, I mean, and we're typically brought in from the technology side, so I can't speak to probably some of the the complicated supply chain things and that stuff. But what I've seen in just the last 6 months has been a huge uptick in manufacturing firms that are going direct to
Mm-hmm.
customers. And I don't know if this is an anomaly or if this is a trend. This is just what I'm
Yeah.
seeing. Is firms saying, "Hey, our cost to handle some of these lower volume clients are becoming very high when it comes to the administrative overhead
Mm-hmm.
needed to communicate, fulfill orders, manage all of that. We want to go direct, and we want to create a self-serve option for these clients. So we've been brought in on several of those where, so what I'm seeing from that trend is, the cost to manage lower volume clients is
Mm-hmm.
going up. I've had clients say a customer service rep costs them $250,000 to recruit, hire, train, implement. And if they can reduce the number of call center individuals, there's some significant gains. And then we've also seen kind of pressures around
Right.
growth. We're not seeing a lot of firms trying to just stay their size and become more efficient. We're seeing firms that are saying, "Hey, we're growing tremendously. We need to automate some of these customer-facing situations." So that's kind of the recent trend I've seen that we've spoken to clients
Sure.
around.
Yeah.
And I also think the other one I see a lot of is kind of the change in
Mm-hmm.
ownership. So maybe a son or daughter taking over, and I mean, they literally will say to me, "I have to drive into the plant to run this report,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to see it on my
Yeah.
phone."
Sure. Yeah.
So those are kind of the ones that we see a lot of, at least in the last 6 months or so. That kind of is, they are typically falling into one of those two
Yeah, I'm seeing
buckets.
this a lot too. And I can add a little bit to that just from the manufacturing perspective. So, for example, we're hearing from a lot of manufacturers who
after the pandemic, and everybody kind of learned that maybe they could work from home or at least part-time from home, and they liked that, right? So they didn't
Sure.
want to drive in to print out that report. They wanted to look at it on their phone. So I
Right.
get that analogy 100%. But the problem is some of these jobs can't be done remotely. And so some manufacturers
Right.
are having a problem with just the workforce in general, with getting people to want to come to work and wanting those jobs that require having to be there. You know, you can't, you can diagnose a failing machine from your home, you know, on a remote device, but you can't fix it from
Can't
home.
fix it.
And so, I mean, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes you have to be there physically. And that's true, I think, with just about any industry
I
or
know.
organization or company, anything you can think of. The food service industry. I mean, somebody has to be there sometimes for some things, right? So,
Right. Yep.
so I think this is a trend that we're seeing now is that they're just having trouble filling jobs because
Do you think it'll come back? Do you think people are gonna
I
forget, or
don't
are we gonna have
know. I
to
mean,
wait
I think the
until?
problem that I'm hearing from manufacturers, like executives at manufacturing companies, is that you know, this younger generation is in particular, they want to work from home, and it's not only just because of the pandemic. It's because they were just kind of raised in the digital world, and so they're used to that. And so then they want, you know, then the guys that do come into work are demanding, well, hey, you let them work from home part of the time. I want to work from home part of the time. Either that, or they're saying,
Right.
you know, they get, you know, give me more vacation days because so I can have this work life balance, which is really important, of course, in
Right.
for any company to provide for its employees. But anyway, we're seeing this a little bit, and I do want to. You mentioned supply chain, so I want to address this a little bit because perhaps it goes back to this pizza delivery analogy that you used early on.
Right.
That stuck in my head because I've noticed this too. You know, any kind of food delivery, you know, Uber Eats or whatever, you order food online and you can
Yeah.
track them. You can see, oh, they're on my street. I'll go ahead and get my money ready, or I'll turn on the porch light or whatever. And because you know they're coming, and then also when they knock on the door, you know that's them and not, you know, somebody else that you weren't expecting maybe.
Right.
And
Right.
but anyway, so is it kind of similar to that with the supply chain? You know, we've got these huge container ships coming from overseas into the US, for example, with all these supplies, and they're sitting there waiting on entry and getting through customs and all that, and the suppliers and the customers and the end users need what's there, and sometimes they just want to know, where is it? You know, if you tell me it's in the middle
Yeah.
of the Atlantic, at least I know. At least that's something.
At
At
least
least
you
if you
know.
tell me
Right.
it's sitting in the harbor in San Diego, then at least I know that. But if it's sitting on a dock somewhere and I can go get it, well, I would like to know that too.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of clients look into different data streams. You would be surprised at how many resources are
Oh,
out there.
really?
Um,
Mm.
oh, we have a client that sells to a certain type of group, and when it comes to importing from a very large foreign company or a foreign country, um, and the type of material that goes to, and we were able to help them acquire data around the shipping logs and the container logs and the type of materials that were on those ships and where those containers were going to then back reference the address so that he could then target his marketing efforts towards those receivers of those shipments. And I was just like, I didn't even know this data was out there.
Yeah.
You can acquire so much data around almost anything you need: location of containers, location of ships, types of material, lead times
Hmm.
on things, and we're seeing a lot of manufacturers like that example kind of taking a more aggressive approach on, I'm not getting what I want, how can I go and find this
Yeah.
information? And there's a lot of it out there. It's just, instead of just sitting here and kind of, you know, getting kind of sad, like, oh, I don't know where anything's at, versus saying, well, who does know where
Exactly.
stuff's
Yeah.
at? And let me guess you what, I bet you they're selling that data, because data is worth more
Oh,
than oil
for
now,
sure.
I think.
And
is
for
the
sure.
is the
No
new saying.
question about that. And, it seems like with all the GPS technology, mapping, things like that, you can put a sensor on that package and should be able to track it
Yep.
all the way from point A to point B pretty easily, right? But why is that? Why are we so behind on that? Why do we still not know where the goods coming from overseas, where are they?
Yeah, I mean,
Is people just not taking advantage
that
of it
hasn't.
or just not using it?
Yeah, that I think you're right, because that has not been a major issue. For a lot of our clients, it's been more, they know when things leave and when they
Yeah.
arrive. In most cases, I mean, we have some clients that are putting GPS tracking devices and things on some very, very highly expensive
Mm-hmm.
cargo. But in most cases, that what I've seen is that hasn't been a major issue. But communicating that back to the client has been. So they have the manifest, they have all the data, they know where things are at. They're just not necessarily breaking that shipment down, understanding what's going to go in and the lead time then to fulfill the order and communicate
Right.
that. So that's the trail end of that to the customer, is where we see clients that are struggling, and we help them with
Yeah.
that some from
Yeah,
time to
we've had
time.
I've had some guests on this podcast as well who talk about just tracking things in a warehouse. You put a sensor on a forklift and you can figure out where things are. Everything in the entire facility is barcoded, and you can know
Yep.
at any time where things are with a map that has dots, of all the things that
Yes.
you've identified that you want to know where they are, so you can even find them more quickly in the warehouse, just to put them on the forklift and get them to the shipping department. And this is really
Yes.
simple technology that simple for the people who may it would be complex
Yeah.
for me, I'm
Right.
sure,
It was
but
complex years ago.
yeah,
Now
but it's a simple
they're all over the
and
place.
data processing on a smartphone or a smart tablet, and it's simple as that, right? And we're making some of these things so complex. So why, I wonder, can't that exact same technology be used on an overseas shipping container, and so that at least you can tell your customer, hey, the controls for this equipment is on the way, and it's crossing the equator right now, or wherever it is, out in the middle of the
Right.
Atlantic.
Yeah.
And this would be so helpful, but and maybe that is out there right now. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely GPS, and there's certain things. A lot of times it depends on the how you get the data
Mm-hmm.
back. So if you're in the middle of the Pacific or the Atlantic, there's not a cell phone
Yeah.
tower. And then where it arrives, you may not also, you might have to have different SIM cards. And so, yeah, there's solutions out there. Most are
Yeah.
expensive,
Yeah.
when it comes to that. But yeah, I haven't seen too many clients not knowing where it's at, versus, how do we actually use that
Right.
data, and what other pieces of data are we missing to actually turn it into
Yeah, I think
information?
most of them are
That's
mainly
what we've seen.
complaining because it's just slow, and they have their
Yes,
customer is
right,
waiting on those components, and it's just really taking too long to satisfy the end
right.
user, to satisfy the customer. So that's a big problem that we're seeing in industry right
Yeah,
now, at least in the manufacturing industry.
yeah. I mean, the clients that are doing it well are staying ahead of the game. I mean, I know I have some manufacturers that we've purchased from that have stayed ahead of the game when it comes to communication,
Yeah, communication.
calling me,
Yeah,
emailing me, and saying, "Hey, here's the lead time, here's where it's at." And I think, versus just not. So that customer communication, direct to customer trend, is even more required now that, you're having supply chain
right.
issues and the client's sitting there not
Right.
knowing.
And I think communication, that's a great keyword to hit, because it is so important. People, I mean, how many times do you call a big company these days and get a real person? Hardly ever, right?
Right.
I mean, it's always a
Never.
robot. I get so tired of talking to robots.
representative,
Right.
please let me talk to a human being.
I know,
And
right? Yeah. Now you're just saying
you're
agent,
just,
agent.
I mean, you're
Give me an agent.
screaming at the phone, I want to talk to a live person. And sometimes you never get there. Sometimes these days, you can't even find a phone number to call. You go to a big company's website and they don't even have a phone number anywhere on that
That's
website.
crazy.
They want you to send an email or chat with a robot, email with a robot. And it's so frustrating. Although robotics, of course, in manufacturing is a big thing. So not all robots are bad.
Yes.
Uh,
Right.
but
just the ones
but
we
when
have
you
to
talk
talk
about
to.
communication, that I don't think that's a trend that will ever go out of style. Speaking to human beings, communicating with them, being honest with them, being forthright and candid about, okay, we realize there's a delay. We realize you're upset about it. But hey, look, here's a tracking system. Here's where your pizza is, and
Right. Yeah. Here's where
it's
you.
going to
Yeah. Here's where you
be,
can check it out.
coming into San Diego or Florida or wherever in 24
Right.
hours, and at least the customer can see that. And I can really see how that kind of software would really help manufacturers today, right now. So
Definitely.
I think that's
Yeah.
really an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and it's not always like you just said, like the things that don't go out of style or the
Right.
fundamentals, right? I mean, we have a client that we're helping with kind of an employee self-serve or a customer self-serve, and we're going to update that data, I think once a
Hmm.
day, right? Like this isn't like every 3 seconds the client wants to
But what do you
know.
mean? But what do
Like
you mean that by that? Just updating?
here's where the here's where the location
Okay.
is, here's where the status is on a
Okay.
daily basis, right? Because it's kind of a heavy lift for them to parse all this
Hmm.
data and get it up with the scale is pretty immense, and so to invest in more of a real time was going to be really, really
Sure. Yeah.
expensive. But once a day, export, import, not a big deal, right? And the
Seems
client and the
simple
customer's
enough,
okay with
right?
that. Customer's okay. Right. Yeah. So there's that trading off. Like you don't have to be Amazon and invest all this money to do real time. We're 3 stops away. Like, do I really need to know it's 3 stops? Okay. Well, maybe I do from an Amazon standpoint, but
Yeah.
does your client need to really
Hmm.
know every 3 minutes? Or can you just do a simple export import with that data once a
Right.
day and the customer can retrieve it? So I think understanding those trade-offs, I think, is the firms that are doing really well are making those decisions, and they're starting to get
Yeah,
some.
that makes a lot of sense. And I think when you bring up a company like Amazon, those kinds of companies have really spoiled us because we can see, sometimes I'll order something on Amazon, I get it that day or the next day.
Yeah, do we really
I
need
mean, is
that?
it
I
really that
mean,
necessary? But
crazy.
because we've
Right.
been spoiled to receive it so quickly, we expect that with everything else. We expect that with our pizza. We keep going back to that example. We expect to have it right now. We expect to have our pumps and our motors and our controls today. And I think that whole climate has changed things because that's now the expectation of the end user. And maybe it's just not
Right.
realistic. And again, going back to communication, we have to tell our customers, look, it takes 2 months. And at a month and a half, I'm going to update you and let you know where we are. And maybe it'll come sooner than
Right.
that, but you should expect a wait. And I think that in the case of manufacturing, what I'm hearing from some of the executives is that there's too much competition. If one person says, hey, we're going to promise you get it in a week, and the next guy realistically says you're going to get it in 2 months, that puts them at a great disadvantage, even though it's probably going to be 2 months for the other
Even
guy
though it's
too,
been
because
2
they're
months.
basically ordering the same thing
Yeah,
from the same
that
supplier.
is.
So it's just a matter of communication, honesty, and being candid. But the end user also has to be, I think, trained a little bit to accept bad news and to be realistic. This is
Right.
not Amazon.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think most of them, but I mean, I'm seeing it too in this. It's kind of funny in this. We had a client the other day that we have a contract, and here's what we're providing on a monthly basis, and then their challenge was like, well, we want you to suggest more stuff, and I'm like, well, I asked my team, and it's like, yeah, why didn't we suggest all this stuff? And they're like, well, last time we spoke to them, they were okay with what we had,
yeah,
and but it kind of goes back to those expectations, because when you're navigating something on your phone, like you're getting presented with options.
Absolutely.
And why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Did you know about that? And so then it's like, wow, like I'm starting to see it as a service company. We have clients that if you're not top of mind and constantly communicating,
Mm-hmm.
understanding their needs, and then, it's something that we'd have quarterly or 6-month check-ins, where now it's like, wow, we might have to have these check-ins a lot sooner. You got to really know your customer and their expectations, because I just saw it shift with the
Right.
client, and they're actually a manufacturing client, and they said, hey, we wanted, this thing. And it's like, man, yeah, it's like if Amazon would have just suggested that
Yeah,
add-on without anyone knowing, and now
exactly.
we have to get
Yeah,
ahead of it.
yeah.
So it's interesting to see the demands of the clients really starting to pull from what they're used to on the
And I
consumer
think that goes
side.
again.
Our businesses
Yeah,
have
it
to
goes back to
adapt.
communication and always asking what is keeping you up at night. What are your pain points so that we
Yep.
can address those? And
Right.
they're different. They could be different every day. I might be sleeping. I might be
Every day.
fine because we solved this other problem, but now something else is keeping me up at night. How can we fix that? So it's
Yep.
communication both ways. The end user the customer has to communicate that too, so that what to do. What kind of solutions to
Yeah.
provide for them. So it should be a two-way street.
Right. Definitely.
Bob, we're
Yeah.
getting a little bit to the end of the time that we have, but this is the Factory of the Future podcast. So I ask all my guests, from your perspective, what does the Factory of the Future look like?
Yeah, I think it's everything we just spoke about. But I also think it's a more collaborative and inclusive environment as well. We've seen the firms that are getting it right are involving
Mhm.
everybody, and they're realizing the untapped potential in every single person that does come to work every day, and the ones that are remote
Right.
as well. But we've seen a way more collaborative, data-driven environment and at the factories that we've been at, and regardless of size, a place that is more technical than most people think. We have to do a better job of telling that story to the workforce, that there is a lot more data and technology in the manufacturing industry. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the view. And then, we want to see data being used to help make decisions and drive efficiencies and help companies grow. And so we think technology is a huge part
absolutely. And we talk all the time on this podcast about how data is great and you want more data, but it's what you do with it that matters. The analysis
Yep.
and the implementation of what that data tells you is where the gold is.
Definitely.
I think, and I think not many people would argue with that. I think.
No.
Well, I want to give you a chance to have the last word. Is there just anything else that maybe we didn't have time to talk about that you want to mention or say? I'll give you a chance to just kind of wrap it up.
Yeah, I would say if you're out there and you've struggled with technology and change, you are not alone. And if you feel like you're behind because you haven't done anything, or you haven't maybe done as much as you think, you're not alone either. But now is the best time. It's cheaper and least expensive than ever. The workforce is more prepared than ever.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel like you're left behind, you're not. You're not alone, and now's the best time to get going. So that's why I'd like to make sure that
I love that.
knows.
That's a great way. That's a great exclamation point on our entire conversation. So I love that. Thanks so much. Thanks for being here and for sharing your knowledge.
Thanks for having
it was
me.
a real pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
This brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. If you have interesting information to share and want to contact me about being a guest on a future episode of this podcast, please send me an email at michelle@navigatecontent.com. You can also send me questions that I will have my expert guests answer for you on a future episode. And in the meantime, please check out my book series on modern manufacturing, to read more than 30 real-world case studies about how global companies are using smart technology and innovation to build the factory of the future. All the links to the books and articles mentioned in this podcast are in the show notes. Have a great week, and please join me for the next episode of Factory of the Future.